Hello, my name's Warren Johnson. I modeled the Union Pacific Railroad and the Utah Railway. I have a layout. It's 11 foot wide by 30 foot long. In the original part of the layout, all of the track is all hand laid. The switches are handmade. The new extension, as I call it, has all been done with flex track. I've tried all different kinds of scenery and also tables. I've used flat top tables, I've used open grid work, and I've also used L-girder for the bench work. Scenery, mostly plaster, but some of it's on styrofoam, some of it's on chicken wire, and some of it I created mountains with folded up newspaper and then wetted them with water and then laid the plaster cloth over that. I've used different kinds of plaster, mostly hydrocal, plus I have used some casting plaster for some of the rock work. The layout is basically a big, long folded dog bone. Parts of the layout, it appears as double track main line, but it's mostly just parallel track, so the train will run different directions on the two tracks. I use DC, straight DC for power. I really agree with DCC. I love it, but I have too much equipment to convert over to DCC. I love the concept. I love the things that you can do with it. What I model is mostly the era that I worked in the Union Pacific diesel shop. I served 34 years working for Union Pacific as a machinist. I used to try to model locomotives that I worked on. Of course, not every locomotive, but I modeled a representation of most of the locomotives that I worked on. I started my apprenticeship. I was working on the 3-unit turbines. As an apprentice, I learned how to work on those. I used to go to work and people would harass me about working on the real things all day, then going home and playing with them at night. And it's a totally different world. But who was the first one to come to me when their kids' trains broke? That was another story. I like to model different things. I like to do a lot of what ifs and a lot of what might have happened. I've modeled a -9 in Utah Railway, which they never had. I've done a -9 in Rio Grande single stripe paint scheme. I've modeled Western Pacific 3-axle locomotives, which they never had. At one time we had a Wisconsin Central diesel come in, and it had to have some traction motors replaced on the diesel, and I noticed it, and I was ready to paint a Wisconsin Central locomotive. So what I did was, in the next couple of days while the locomotive was still in the diesel shop, I went home and I painted up a Wisconsin Central SD45 and put the number of the locomotive on it. I took it down to the shop to show some of the guys, and they was thoroughly amazed that they could see a miniature of the real locomotive that they was working on, and they was quite impressed with that. One time we had General Electric factory representation, and we had EMD factory reps in the shop to oversee warranty work that we was doing on the locomotives. And so I was talking to the EMD factory rep at one time, and he told me that Union Pacific at the time, this was in the early to mid 70s, that Union Pacific and Santa Fe was talking to each other about a joint service between Chicago and Los Angeles, and they would both provide locomotives, and they would also provide the equipment half and half. So I thought that was pretty neat. So I painted a Santa Fe GP60M in the Santa Fe paint scheme. I took it a little farther than that, so I painted a GP60M in Santa Fe paint, the red and silver war bonnet, but I used Union Pacific decals on the side and Union Pacific number series and also put Union Pacific Winged Herald on the nose. So even a little farther, what Santa Fe did when they painted their Super Series locomotives, they reverted back to their old original passenger paint scheme. So I painted a GP60M and a Dash 840B in Union Pacific's old passenger paint scheme, and they were painted yellow with silver trucks, leaf brown paint, and the red separation stripe went across the top and ended at the back of the cab. I've been into model railroading all my life. I used to get trains for Christmas every year as a little kid, but that was Lionel. And then I noticed how much more real HO scale was, so I converted into HO scale. I started on the layout in a spare bedroom and built just a little 12 by 12 foot layout, hand laid all the track until I got to a switch on each end and quit. And then I decided it's now or never, so I gritted my teeth and built my first hand laid switch, and then after that I got quite proficient at making switches. I started the layout probably in 65 or so, a few years after we moved into this house. Later on, as our family grew, we needed more space in the house, so we added on an extension to the house, 30 foot wide by 12 foot is what we added, and so I claimed the basement. And that's where I built my layout. As I was building the layout, I decided that I had more time than money, so that's why I hand laid all of the rail at that time. And then as I got older and the family started growing, then I had a little more money than time, and so I went to Flex Track and used Flex Track and regular Atlas switches. I painted the rails, so even though it's Code 100 rail everywhere, it doesn't appear to be as big as Code 100 usually appears. I completed the main line in 1981, and we had a small golden spike ceremony here on the layout. And we drove a golden spike, and if you can look real close, you can find it if I pointed out where it's at. A friend of mine wanted me to never forget the date. It was March 27th, 1981, so he built a boxcar and gave to me with the reporting number 3/27/81, so I'd never forget the date of my golden spike ceremony. One of the lessons learned when I built my layout, I built it when I was young, not realizing someday I was going to get old, so I built a duck under to get into the center part of the layout. And no problem when I was young, but now that I'm older and got metal knees, it's harder to get down on my hands and knees to get over there. So my advice to everybody is to not build a duck under on your layout. Either build it around the room, on the walls, or have it so that you have a lift out to get in and out of any portion of the layout that you can't just walk around. First, I'm a modeler. Second, I'm a photographer. And third, I'm a rail fan. So the way I built my layout is so that I could represent trains that I used to work on. I have a unit grain train, I have a unit coal train, a unit ore train, and one particular train that we used to work all the time when I worked out in the yard was the SLOAZ, the SLOAZ. SL for St. Louis, OA for Oakland, and Z was a priority train. And every day that train came into Salt Lake and we worked as a through train. The first third of the train was enclosed auto rack cars. The middle third of the train was always PFE reefers, and the last third of the train was always piggyback flats. So I've always wanted to represent that train, so I have on my layout. Another thing about my layout, I built the layout for me. So therefore, I build it as a rail fan to watch trains. It's really not built too much for operation. I can operate, but I build it for me. There's in places not really much room for anybody else, and I like some operations, just setting out cars and picking up cars, but as far as having car card system or anything like that, that don't interest me, because we did that on the job and I don't want to do it at home for a hobby. My layout is not really a representation of any specific area, but I did build it to kind of represent Martin, Utah on the Utah Railway, and also Uinta and Columbia on the main part of the Union Pacific Railroad. It's not a specific place, but it's kind of the essence of the place and sort of a loose representation of what I remember going to and taking photographs. The backdrop around the room at the time was painted by a 14-year-old boy, and he painted it as I kind of requested the area I wanted the walls painted to represent, and he did a wonderful job on the job that he did. Thank you for visiting my layout. It was a pleasure to have you here. I used to dream of a huge layout, but when I built this layout, it was enough for me. It don't have to be huge to enjoy. Build the layout as you like to build your layout, what pleases you. If your thing is having a double-ended yard, then build a layout with double-ended yards. If it's mountain scenery, build a layout with mountain scenery. Whatever you do, build it to please yourself and nobody else. Thank you.